So in this video, I just wanted to create a layperson's guide to a CRM project, to sort of walk you through the various stages of a CRM project and perhaps some other things to look out for. So it's really designed for people who are perhaps managing a CRM project for the first time, or your sponsor, or there's a CRM project happening on your watch. It's just to try and give you a sort of primer on the various steps and stages of the CRM project. So in terms of the first stage, I guess is probably the sort of basics of, so I guess the starting point is awareness. So people either won't have a system or they'll have a system in place which they're perhaps initially happy enough with, but over time there's a rising awareness that perhaps they need a new platform. That might be triggered, perhaps there's somebody new come into the organisation that's used CRM systems before and kind of surprised at the current state of play with technology. So this stage can take quite a long time. There's a bit of a sort of, from initial awareness to sort of concrete decision to go ahead with something can take quite a long time. But typically as that awareness grows, that'll turn into some sort of business case generation. I'm going to say with all of this, these can be very much informal steps or very formal steps. It just depends on the organisation type. Typically, the larger the organisation, the more formalised the process is going to be, but that's not wholly true. But as I say, the steps are the same, regardless of whether it's a formal or informal process. So generally the awareness stage will end up with some sort of business case that confirms that a CRM project should take place. Now, business case is a bit difficult. I don't think you can ever get to sort of a pounds and pence business case with a CRM system, but there is absolutely no point in taking on a CRM project unless it's going to make a difference. So that does need some scrutiny and some rigorous analysis just to make sure that the benefits that are being conveyed stack up. Now, once you've got the business case signed off and there's an agreement to go ahead, then typically you're looking at some sort of requirements definition exercise. Now, requirements definition is just trying to get down, ideally on paper, is some detail as to what the system looks like, what it's going to do, how it's going to benefit people, and what are the functional requirements. Now, in my experience, people tend to major on the functional requirements, and actually I think the meat of a requirement specification is defining what the system is going to do, on which business processes are going to be supported by the system and how. I think that's where the emphasis is going to be. I think if you get too hung up on functional requirements, you end up with a very long list, and then that excludes a lot of technologies that actually probably could do the job. Now, once you've got those requirements defined, then typically you're going to go through some sort of procurement exercise. That may be as simple as getting evaluation copies of different software options, vendor demonstrations, through to perhaps a more formalised request for proposal process. I think the thing to be aware of in procurement is you've got two dimensions typically in the CRM marketplace. You've got the technology itself, the platform, and then you've got the implementation of it. And typically in the CRM marketplace, those are different organisations. So products like Salesforce.com or Microsoft Dynamics, they've got a network of implementation partners and system integrators. There are some where the software developer and the implementer are the same organisation, but that tends to be the exception rather than the rule these days. I think that's an important thing to understand, because actually it's the implementation partner that's typically the weak point with a lot of CRM projects rather than the technology platform. In my experience, the sort of standard of system implementers is relatively low, so you do need to do careful research and due diligence, make sure you're contracting with a capable party to implement the system, because nothing will mess up a CRM project like a poor quality implementer. So as I say, technology platform implemented two different parts of that. So whatever procurement exercise you go through, you need to look at it in terms of those two dimensions. Now, once you've contracted and said, right, we're going to go ahead with company X and platform Y, then generally the first step is what I would call some level of design. So what we're really looking at here is translating the requirements into something that the implementer can build in order to deliver the system. Now, I don't want to get into any depth about the agile versus waterfall debate. Suffice to say, there are broadly two methodologies. Waterfall, which is a little bit discredited these days, the emphasis on that is documenting everything in detail up front and then disappearing off and developing it and delivering what was documented. Now, there are challenges around that simply because implementers do struggle sometimes to create these documents in a way that people can read and sign off and be sure that what's been documented is what they want. And actually, secondly, organisations are pretty rubbish at actually reading documentation and signing it off. And so what can happen is you do the document, company goes off for 2, 3, 4 months, whatever it is, develops something, presents it back, and everyone goes, that's not quite what we want. So that's been the downfall of waterfall. The other extreme is sort of agile, and this has much less focus on specifying requirements in a written way, and very much more around a sequence of development sprints. Do a sprint, playback, course correct, do a sprint, playback, course correct, do a sprint, playback, etc., etc. That's fine. People can see the system developing, so that gets over some of the issues with waterfall, but there are challenges with agile in terms of it can take a long time and it can require a lot of feedback and require a lot of immediate feedback from the project team, so that doesn't suit all organisations. In practice, what tends to happen is most people have some sort of hybrid model. There's some level of documentation, there's some level of iterative approach. Develop something, play it back, check everybody's on course. So that's just something to be aware of in terms of the design of the system. Once you've got through that phase, we'll get into development mode. I think also the biggest thing really is to make sure that organisations are playing back what they develop on a regular basis. CRM technologies are great because they do allow for rapid prototyping, so you can do the base build of a system, the visuals, all the fields, the new entities, etc. You can do that really quick. You can play that back so people can see what they're going to get. Stuff in the background can take more time to develop, but that does allow people to check that you're delivering what's required as you go along. I think the big thing to watch out for within development is really that the implementer is internally testing what they do. And I'll talk about testing in more detail in a minute, but if the quality of testing is low and they hand you something pretty raw for your user acceptance testing, that can create a lot more workload on the test team and really extend the duration of the project. So once the build's complete, we typically go into what's called a UAT, user acceptance testing phase, and there's probably two parts to this really. Generally, I would expect to see sort of core user acceptance team done by the main project team, which might be, a handful of people are sort of heavily involved in the project. And once they're happy, then that's opened up to the broader user community. Now, I think one of the things you've got to check on testing is that people are doing it effectively, because people don't like testing because it's boring and often perceived as unnecessary. Of course, it's going to be okay. Unfortunately, often it isn't. So it's something that does need to be done, and it does need to be controlled. And so you do need to make sure there is a fully structured testing program that people go through. I'm a great fan of using test scripts. You just say the scenarios you want people to play out, what they need to do, what are the expected outcomes, and just get them to sign off that they've tested and checked that. You do need to be thorough in your testing. You do not want to be going live with a system that's half-baked and there's all sorts of problems with it, particularly if it's customer or public facing in some way, because then the errors are much more visible to a much wider audience. Once testing is complete, you're getting close to go live, so you're looking at things like training at that stage. Historically, pre-COVID times, most training has been face-to-face. Classroom type training tends to be best. Obviously, in COVID times, that hasn't worked so well. So, that might be a class on Zoom or Teams or whatever. I do think that currently we're seeing a lot more use of video-based training. It's just very easy to create a sort of 5-10 minute video, kind of as we are doing here. But it's great to be able to get these sort of bite-sized chunks of content, training content out there to use as a very effective way. We're seeing more and more of that at the moment. I think the key thing to bear in mind with all of this is that training needs to be done in context of the business process, not just about how to use the technology. So it's not how do you use Salesforce or how do you use Microsoft Dynamics. It is how do you use Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics in the very narrow confines of our business processes, the way we work. What do we expect people to do to support our business processes? And that requires much more tailored, customized training to make that effective. Now, training done, we then move into a sort of go live phase where we cut over to the new system. And then we're sort of into the realms of what I think is the biggest challenge often with the CRM project, which is this whole sort of user adoption piece. Because by and large, you're only going to get the benefits from a CRM system if you can get people to use it in a consistent and structured way over time. And that varies from situation to situation, circumstance to circumstance. But getting people to use systems is not an easy task. Now, if people are used to it and it's just a replacement technology and it's thoroughly ingrained in them, they've got to use the system, that's the only way of doing things, then that's less of a challenge. If people have not used systems before, getting them to adopt it, that's tough. There will always be a few people who, you train them, they'll go and use the system they're doing, and they'll use it the way they're meant to use it, and they'll use it all the time, they'll be fine. But there'll be another group that kind of use it occasionally or kind of use it, but not quite in the way that was envisaged. And there'll be another group that don't want to use it at all. And you've got to try and somehow get all of them on there using the system and using it in the way that's anticipated. And there's quite a lot involved in that. I'm not going to go into change management. We'll be doing videos on change management in due course. But just bear in mind that requires a big effort. I would say in many cases you should consider putting as much effort into the post-live user adoption phase as you put into the build of the system. In reality, for many people, it's probably sort of 5% max the effort often going into that user adoption piece, and that's way too little. It's a big undertaking. It needs to be properly resourced. Now, once you've gone live and people are successfully using it, you're really now transitioning into business as usual. And that's, things like skills transfer, to make sure that perhaps your staff can continue to administer and develop the system. You're not entirely reliant on the implementer to move things forward. It's about putting the processes in place so that you can manage and adapt the system over time according to changing needs and circumstances. It's having things in place like training for new staff and having means to monitor ongoing user adoption. So, I think CRM systems can be a bit of a fragile flower. once they go live, you can't take that for granted. They do need to be managed very tightly over time. So that sort of sets out the sort of main phases. As a final point, in terms of time to do all this, as you said, quite a lot of phases there, quite a lot of work to be done. I think that surprises people a lot of the time. I think even for a small project, if you talk from sort of starting requirements definition to going live, typical timelines might be 6 months. For a larger project, it certainly could be a couple of years. So there's a lot involved, and it takes quite a long time. And always made worse people are juggling, the people involved in a CRM project typically got day jobs as well, and those have various demands at various times of the year. So that does slow everything up. So it can take a while. Anyway, that was a layperson's guide to the various stages of CRM project. Hopefully, that's been of some assistance. Thank you.